Matthew 28, 1-10. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my disciples to go to Galilee. There they will see me." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and the hearing of his word. I thought this morning, rather than a sermon, I would tell a story, and I hope you're okay with that. It is one of my favorite stories. I heard this years and years and years ago. I think it might have been I was junior high or high school, and I don't know whether it was at camp or at a church meeting. I'm pretty sure I heard it around a campfire someplace the first time I heard it, and it has been one of my favorites ever since. It's written by a man named Walter Wangerin Jr., and it's called The Ragman. So it wasn't long ago when I was living in the city, and it happens sometimes. Normally I'm a good sleeper, but it happens sometimes that I can't sleep. And on this particular occasion, I had gotten to sleep okay, but I woke up very, very early, and I couldn't get back to sleep, and I knew I wasn't going to get back to sleep, so I just got up and decided to walk through this city that was all around me. It was dark. There were very few cars and almost no people out at that time in the morning, and I didn't really expect to see anyone. And then I saw someone, and I saw him from a distance. He was a big guy, strong. You could tell he was intelligent by the look in his eyes. His shoulders were broad. His arms were strong. He was tall and just an impressive human being. And he was pulling a cart behind him, of all things. And as he walked through the streets of the city, in the early hours of the morning, when it was still dark outside, he called with a loud, clear voice, "Rags, rags, get your new rags for old from the Ragman." This is strange. I've never seen anything like this. I'm awake. I'm not getting back to sleep at all today. I'm going to follow this guy and see what's going on. And I followed him, and he walked up and down the streets of the town, calling out, "Rags, rags, get your new rags for old from the Ragman." First, there was no one out, but then just as the sun was coming up and the Ragman was going down the street of this residential neighborhood, I saw on the steps of an apartment building, an old rundown tenement, a girl. She was sitting on the steps. She had a bandage wrapped around her head, and there was blood trickling down her cheek. And the Ragman walked up to her, and he smiled, and he said, "If you give me your new rag, or give me your old rag, I'll give you a new one." The girl didn't respond. She just looked at him with kind of a glazed expression on her face. And the Ragman smiled again, and he reached down, and he took the bandage off of her head. Then he reached back into his cart, and he pulled out a bright blue baseball cap, and he placed that cap on her head. And as he did so, bleeding stopped. And then, maybe even more extraordinarily, he took the bandage and he wrapped it around his own head. And as he did so, a little trickle of blood began to flow down his cheek and drip off of his chin. The girl smiled, laughed, jumped up, clapped her hands, and ran up the steps and back into the apartment building. The ragman reached behind him and he grabbed the cart, and with the blood flowing down his face, he walked and he called out, "Rags, rags! Get your new rags for old from the ragman." Now, there was no way I was doing anything except following that ragman to see what else he would do. And he walked and he walked and he moved into another neighborhood with another set of apartment buildings and some rundown houses, and he came across a woman sitting out on her front porch, the steps really in front of the house. And she was just in a state. She was crying and sobbing, and it wasn't a quiet, pretty cry. It was just full-blown tears, weeping and wailing, and all she had to dry her eyes was this nasty old stained handkerchief. And the ragman walked up to her and he said to her, "If you give me your old rag, I'll give you a new one." She looked at him and she shook her head and she just started crying. She didn't know what he was talking about. But the ragman reached down and he took out of her hand, pulled it out of her hand. She resisted, pulled it right out, that nasty old handkerchief. Then he reached back into his cart and he pulled out a brand new, white as snow linen handkerchief. And he gave it to her. And as she took that handkerchief and touched it to her eyes, she stopped crying. And a smile came into her eyes. And she looked up at the ragman in amazement, but he wasn't really looking at her anymore. He'd taken her handkerchief and he put it to his eyes. And as he did so, he began to cry. And tears streamed down his eyes, and they mixed with the blood that was already running down his cheek, and they dripped off of his chin. And he reached back and he grabbed his cart and he called out as he walked away, "Rags, rags! Get your new rags for old from the ragman." Well, he kept moving and he was picking up speed. The day was moving on. It was approaching late morning, 11:30, almost noon maybe. And he came out of the residential areas into the business district, and there were cars going by now at an alarming rate, and people were busy. They were on their way to work. They were moving in their cars. They were walking fast up and down the sidewalk, and the ragman wove his way through them, calling out and pulling his cart until he came to the only person that didn't seem to be going anywhere. There was a guy leaning up against a telephone pole at an intersection, and the ragman stopped. And he said, "Don't you have work to do today?" And the man looked at him and said, "Who's going to hire me?" And he leaned away from that pole, and I could see that the arm of the jacket on the left side was flat against his body. He had no arm. And the ragman just looked at him and he smiled. He had a big old grin on his face, and he said, "If you give me your old rag, I'll give you a new one." The man looked at him like he was crazy, and the ragman, without even asking, he just reached over and he started to take the jacket off of the man. And he reached back into his cart and he got out a brand new leather bomber jacket and he put it on the man. And as he did so, the ragman's two strong arms went with him. And when he put that other man's jacket on himself, the sleeve on the left side was flat against his body. The man was stunned, but the ragman didn't wait for a thank you or anything. He just grabbed the cart with his one hand and he pulled it down the sidewalk. And with tears and blood and one arm, he called out, "Rags, rags! Get your new rags for old from the ragman." All that day I followed him up and down the streets, and he was moving faster and faster and faster. And at last the sun began to set and it was getting cold again. And he was moving now into parts of town that I had no business being. But I followed him anyway. And he went down a dark alley with tall buildings on each side, and it stunk, and there was garbage, and there were dumpsters that were rusted out, and it looked like no one had been back that way to do anything good in years. And And I thought it was going to be a dead end, but as we got way down in that alley, the ragman stopped, and I looked over and I saw that he was standing over a man lying in a pool of his own vomit against a dumpster. I thought he was dead, but then I could hear him snoring, and every once in a while he twitched and moved a little bit. And I could smell the reek of alcohol from him from a dozen yards away. The ragman didn't call out. Maybe he didn't want to wake him up, although I'm not sure he could have woken him up. But he looked at the man and he said quietly, "If you give me your old rag, I'll give you a new one." Well, the only thing that guy had to shield him from the cold of the night as he lay there on the hard paved ground was a ratty old blanket that was full of holes and covered in stains of who knew what. The ragman, he reached back into his cart and he pulled out a brand new thick wool blanket. And he took that old blanket off of the bum and he laid that new blanket on top of him and he tucked it in. And I don't know how or why, but it just seemed like that old man on the ground just seemed to breathe a little easier. And the ragman, he took that old blanket and he wrapped it around his shoulders. And as he did so, he stumbled like he was drunk. And with blood coming from his head and tears coming from his eyes, with one arm and staggering and stumbling, he pulled that cart down the alley and he called out, "Rags, rags, get your new rags for old," from the ragman. And with the bleeding and the crying and the staggering and the drunkenness, I don't know how he was moving like he did, but he was moving fast, and I followed him now all the way out of town till we got to the edge of the city dump. And he didn't go toward the entrance. He didn't follow the road. He walked around the side along the fence that walled it off, that kept the people out of it because it was dangerous in there, and he got to a spot in this chain link fence where there was a break, and the fence had bent a little bit. And the ragman pushed himself through and he pulled his cart after, and I followed him, and he walked around the piles of garbage and the mounds of trash until he came to a giant hill of garbage right in the middle of the dump. And he pulled his wagon up the top of that. And right at the very top, he stopped. And he took a breath. And it was like he tried to call out, but the strength wasn't left in him. And he just said, "Rags, rags, get your new rags for old," from the ragman. And then the ragman dropped to his knees and he fell on his face and he died. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. All I knew is I was crying now. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why. I didn't even really know what. But I knew I was in no state to go anywhere, and I looked over and I saw this beat up old car with the door pulled open on it, and I climbed into the back seat and I laid down and I went to sleep. And I don't know how long I slept. It felt like a long, long time. But I woke up to sun, bright, dazzling sun shining through the window of that car right on my face. And I squinted and I shook and I got up, and I had to take a moment to remember where I was, but then I remembered the ragman. And I pulled myself out of the car and I went to look for him. And I didn't have to look long because there he was, standing right where I'd seen him fall before. But instead of being covered with blood and tears and having one arm and clothed in rags, the ragman was standing there, and he was dressed all in white with two strong arms, and his eyes flashed intelligence, and his body just radiated strength. And I looked at him, and he turned and he looked at me and he said, "If you give me your old rags, I'll give you new ones." And I didn't hesitate. I took off all my clothes and I handed them to the ragman, and he reached into his cart and he handed me bright, new, white clothing, and I put them on. And I fell at his feet and I wept. and gratitude for the Ragman, the Christ. Amen. Amen.